Welcome to this third panel. I think we've had really a very special treat in our first two panels. It's as good as it gets, and that's speaking very well for it. This was I think the momentum from the first two panels, I'm sure, carries on over here, and we're very fortunate to have two individuals here who can address gender issues, democracy, justice, as few others can. Our first speaker is going to be Sima Wali, who is herself a kind of who's who in organizations and people who have been involved with women's issues, issues of concern to Amnesty International, and really has already made an important contribution to where we've come in addressing so many of the important issues, constitutionally particularly, in Afghanistan. As is indicated, she is president of and CEO of Refugee Women in Development Incorporated, also vice president of Sisterhood Global Institute. She was active figure at Bonn in December '01. She was also a chief organizer of Afghan Women's Summit, which was held in Brussels in December also of 2001. So I think we're very fortunate now to have her here in Washington and talk to us, and then we'll proceed with our second speaker in just a moment. Please.
Thank you very much. I will just basically highlight the issues that are relevant to gender issues in Afghanistan, and in so doing, try to highlight some of the issues that are of concern to women, some of the opportunities and the challenges that lie ahead with regard to the advancement and liberation of Afghan women. I do want to state at the outset that gender issues are intricately linked to larger socioeconomic and political issues in Afghanistan. And in so saying, I'll start with the fact that Afghanistan and Afghan women was put on the agenda when the U.S. campaign was linked to bring down Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan. And it was linked basically to the freedom and advancement of Afghan women, and freeing Afghan women from the abuses of Taliban was used as a rationalization for the bombing campaign. By promising freedom, democracy, and restoration of human rights, the U.S. renewed hope among the people of Afghanistan, especially its women. As an Afghan American, I'm here to say that both Afghanistan and its female population rightfully expect that these promises be kept by the United States. Let me highlight a few advancements that have been made and some challenges with regard to Afghan women. When the Taliban were toppled in 2001, we held historic talks in Bonn that created the new government. These accords, although historic and encouraging in nature, neglected to address issues that were relevant to the Afghan population, such as security, narco-terrorism, demobilization, and other impediments to peace. And as such, the Bonn agreements, as they were called, had major flaws, and chief among these flaws were legitimizing the power of the warlords and basing the Afghan current structure in Afghanistan on the power of the warlords, who themselves were and are still the source of illicit trade, drug trafficking, human rights, and violations amongst women. Also, it's a major concern to Afghan women that I work with and I talk to in my discourses and in our work in Afghanistan, that they're concerned that it's the warlords that have gained powerful positions in the current government, who today fuel corruption and undercut the security of the common Afghan person, and especially women. I think in Bonn, the warlords won by keeping critical issues such as disarmament, demobilization, and illicit drugs that fuel terrorism off the bargaining table. And as President Karzai himself noted, drugs in Afghanistan are threatening the very existence of the Afghan state. And according to the UN report, $2.3 billion, which is equivalent to half of Afghanistan's gross national product, is derived from illicit drugs. As you can see that at the outset, Afghans contend that the bargaining power of the warlords was greatly influenced by America's war on terrorism. And in fact, they contend that the US aided and aids and abets the warlords, providing them with funds and weapons, and all the while looking the other way when the warlords abuse power. And the Afghans rightfully contend that the American war was not meant to liberate the Afghan people from tyrannical forces, but rather to save American lives from terrorist forces who had found safe haven in their land. And although I do want to state both the challenges, and these are the issues that are being relayed to me by the Afghan people, especially the Afghan women, and it's I need to state them and be honest in such discourses. It is not for the reason of pointing the blame at any political party or any nation, but rather to draw attention to the issues that affect the Afghan women's liberation. And in so doing, I do want to state that although Taliban and the revolt Taliban are no longer in Afghanistan, improvements in the lives of Afghan women remain a hollow promise. Although we do have a constitution that was ratified in January of 2004, and we're pleased we had the opportunity to develop a constitution, I do want to state that no constitution in and of itself can guarantee the establishment of peace and stability and the creation of a civil society. And I also want to state that despite the trumpeting of women's issues, a paltry sum has been committed to fund women's programs in both the civil and the civil society sectors. At the Grand Council, or the Loya Jirga, which was recently formed, women had to deal with a lot of challenges. When the draft constitution was presented to women, it had major flaws, and in fact, it did not take their rights and considerations into concern. And women fought very hard to regain the rights that were enshrined for the advancement in previous constitutions, in the current constitution, and I'm pleased to see that Afghan women were granted equal rights alongside men in the current constitution. But these rights remain at peril of harsh Islamic interpretation of laws by highly conservative judiciary, who themselves, the members, are trained in the former Taliban madrasas. And visible strides in the post-Taliban society do continue to beg for long-term strategies that will be necessary to remove restrictions against women which deny them access to education, healthcare, employment, and security. Afghan women have just begun their long battle for equity, and they will not settle for symbolic advances. Today I can attest that roads have been built, schools have been constructed, which allows the boys, Afghan boys and girls, to enroll and register and attend school. But little has altered the life for Afghans from the days of the Taliban. And upon closer investigation, one sees that the quality of education, for example, is dismal. Teachers are not trained. Children attend school for 2-3 hours a day, and textbooks and school supplies are totally absent from many of these schools. And despite relative advances for a gendered balanced post-Taliban government, gross inequities toward women remain. Capable institutions and viable institutions are absent. Narco-trafficking is rampant. The flow of arms is not curbed. Security is grossly insufficient. Warlordism and violence against women continue. Yet Afghans contend that this violence this time is around, committed not by the Taliban but by renegade militias and warlords supplied with arms and dollars by the US. And is, in essence, lawlessness and gender apartheid continue to occur with international impunity. With this backdrop, Afghans remain baffled by America's continued support for the warlords who undercut the transfer of power to the common Afghan person, transfer that's necessary to shift from a lawless country supported by foreign intervention to finally establish a society that is based on law and democracy. So the question remains, what is America to do? Should the US continue to legitimize a warlord class that has already lost the support of the Afghan people? Or should we help the Afghans to build a tolerant and open society? Now that we have, and the Afghan people have finally had an opportunity after more than 2 decades of foreign intervention, it is time to do the right thing, transfer power back to the common Afghan person. Let me, for a few minutes, cover the politics of aid. President Bush promised us the Marshall Plan for building Afghanistan. While such a plan has been proposed to rebuild Iraq, no strategy is in place for a Marshall Plan for Afghanistan. Spending for Afghanistan, as the ambassador noted earlier, represents less than 1% of the supplemental bill for Iraq and Afghanistan. The $20 billion request for Iraq reconstruction is 25 times larger than the request for Afghanistan. An average of $64 for the common Afghan person in 2002 pales in comparison with donations amounting to approximately 258 in Bosnia and 336 per Iraqi person. This represents a disparity in funding and actually hinders the actual reconstruction necessary to build a viable civil society. I'm heartened to say that at the donors conference in Berlin, the Afghan government asked that this future be secured by requesting $27.6 billion over 7 years. And I do want to note that the US pledged more than half of this, the amount that was pledged in Berlin. And also, in addition to this, the US pledged an additional $1.2 billion in aid. But it also sped up the building of the highway and sped up, which cost about $180 million project to build the Kabul-Kandahar highway, which Afghans contend is necessary for military operations. These pledges are generous, but the filtering down of aid to the Afghan person on the ground is quite another matter. And what is being touted here internationally and what really happens on the ground and what happens in the daily lives of the Afghan person really tells a totally different story. Afghans contend, especially those that have worked and are working currently, to provide the necessary services such as health, education, human rights, and working with women, contend that a large sum of the assistance monies are siphoned by military operations, and a large share is run through American contractors going to US and international contractors, and their very high staff salaries and the high administrative costs. Inadequate funds with the slow pace of development undermines the Karzai government as well as the reconstruction process. Moreover, I do want to state that the Afghan people themselves are not the main power and are not in the driving seat to drive the reconstruction process. Their expertise are totally underutilized while foreign quote-unquote experts reap reconstruction benefits. In Berlin, the aid that was committed for Afghanistan, this is what the breakdown is that at least 12 billion of that aid yearly is spent for military assistance, which does not include expansion of our own domestic security forces. Over the 2 years into the new government, almost 2 years into the new government, we are losing momentum to build on the initial goodwill of the Afghan people toward the United States. And in my discussion with the scores of Afghan women and their male counterparts, it's evident that there's a heightened frustration that too little is trickling down to the Afghan people. And Afghan women contend that they're left out of the process of reconstruction. What I experience here in the United States and what is tutored here and what is really happens on the ground tell two different stories. For example, what women in Afghanistan experience on a daily basis is communication systems in disarray. It is difficult to make a telephone call. For us, that we are working with a number of non-governmental organizations, communicating with our staff on the ground and even communicating with people who on the ground. I mean, it costs at least $20 per week, and I'm giving an average, to buy a card to make telephone calls using the mobile phone. The Afghan non-governmental organizations and the civil society institutions do not have the expensive satellite phones, and they cannot sustain the costs of this communication. There is no electricity, sporadic electricity. Housing is minimal. Because the cost of rents have gone so high, the small and the medium-sized community-based organizations have great difficulty in expanding and extending their operations in Kabul because the cost of living and the cost of housing is so high. And in the provinces, they cannot conduct their programs because of the security considerations. I also want to state here that the Bob Woodward's claim that $70 million of Afghanistan money for the reconstruction of Afghanistan was siphoned off into Iraq flies in the face of every Afghan woman whose suffering was invoked to designate this money. I demand on behalf of the Afghan people that this money be reappropriated to Afghanistan with interest, and at least 60% of this money be earmarked for Afghan women, because women constitute more than 60% of the Afghan demographics. I do want to state that the status of women, how does it fare? Today, it still ranks among the lowest in the world. Maternal and infant mortality ratios are the highest in the world. And every 30 minutes, a woman dies in childbirth due to pregnancy-related complications. An Afghan child is 25 times more likely to die before the age of 5. And as such, women are rapidly losing hope. It is necessary to understand that 60% of the Afghan population is women. And when you're trying to rebuild a country such as Afghanistan, which has been devastated by more than 2 decades of warfare, you need every human resource to be utilized to accelerate the reconstruction process, and we cannot afford to leave women out, because this is not about gender politics and simple economics. Building a country with less than 40% of its population does not make economic sense. want to make some recommendations, and this comes from the people I work with, the Afghan women, what they see on the ground and what their recommendations are and what they ask me to convey to you in these exchanges. They fear that rebuilding Afghanistan does not have a comprehensive plan that focuses on long-term stability. We do need a comprehensive plan. Nation building cannot be done in a haphazard way or in a piecemeal fashion, one road or a few schools at a time. What is needed is a long-term comprehensive plan to secure the peace, disarm the militias, displace the warlords, and to confront the highly lucrative narco-terrorism that plagues the Afghan people and women in particular. Most of all, it requires the building of shattered institutions that have been destroyed by 2 years of warfare. It is important to understand the building of civil society and indigenous civil society institutions. We need to make sure that they play a very important role in the process of maintaining a balance in Afghanistan. In open society, you need powerful institutions balanced by civil society institutions, and most of these civil society institutions are run by women. They have operated when we did not, over the past 20-some years, that when we did not have a government, they provided the critically needed human services, often at grave risk to themselves and their families. They operated clandestinely under the Taliban, both in Pakistan and also in Afghanistan, providing services such as health, education, social services, and maintaining contact with the international community. In fact, women took the lead in informing the international community of the atrocities of the Taliban. And I think they must have a place in building the Afghan society. We need to ensure that both institution and capacity building is needed to establish the rule of law in Afghanistan, and it is necessary to hand over Afghanistan to its rightful owners. And this scenario is completely missing from the larger plan. In the absence of viable institution building resting on a sustainable peace and democracy, the U.S. will lose Afghanistan again to the growing threat of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. In conclusion, I do want to state that the stark reality of today's Afghanistan is that were it not devastated by conflict, the country's annual per capita income would be about $500 per person. We have lost that opportunity. And we have had foreign intervention in the wars that have been fueled and the narco-terrorism that have been fueled by foreign intervention. I think that opportunity needs to be given again to the Afghan people. And invoking success in Afghanistan will only be achieved when there is a balance between military aid and human development assistance. Only when Afghan women and men are lifted from poverty, when their civil society institutions serve the local people, then and only then will the U.S. campaign to win the hearts and minds of the Afghan people be on the right path to deliver true justice and democracy. I will leave you with a quote from the United Nations Development Program about human security, which is the major precursor to reconstruction and ensuring that the Afghan people are in the driving seat to build Afghanistan. And I quote, "Human security lies at the core of building war-torn nations, constituting a necessary condition to peace. The world can never be at peace unless people have security in their lives. The search for security in such a milieu lies in development, not in arms." And unfortunately, I cannot say that the Afghan women in particular feel safe and secure to leave their homes, to participate in education classes, to go to school, to run their operations. We don't have that opportunity, and it's a necessary precursor to all processes and to bringing peace and justice and conducting nation building in Afghanistan. I'll stop right here, and I will be happy to take some of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. About 6 or 8 months ago, I had an opportunity, I was invited to meet with a group of students at the Harvard Law School's program in Islamic, we called it Legal Islamic or Afghan Legal Initiative Program. Was that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And I was amazed at how well versed these students were in Afghanistan, how dedicated they were to their work. They knew all the sources. They were all out there. And then I got to meet the man who was their coordinator. And it is our speaker here today, Neamat Nojumi. And I think it's, you know, that group is a real credit to what can be done when you have direction of someone like our speaker here, who I got to talk to during the course of the evening, and was very impressed with his knowledge about those issues which he's going to address today. He has a degree from the Fletcher School in a Master's in Law and Diplomacy. He's the author of a number of books. He's worked as a consultant to USAID. And I understand you have a book coming out shortly on the Taliban.
Actually, it is in a broader perspective.
A broader perspective, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, political transition in Afghanistan has been one of the most complicated issues that I have ever seen in my studies and observations. Anywhere we go, there are discussions. Today, I would like to bring you with me to look a little bit more from the other side, the other way, from the Afghan perspective, or by understanding a little more the parameters about the available resources and the objectives of a political transitions for Afghans. 2 years ago, when the Taliban regime was unseated by the U.S. coalition forces and the Afghan people, the perception about the political transition was to capture Kabul and set a new government. And in the course of time, since this past 2 years, we have noticed that that perception was simplistic, and it has required much more intuitive and more attention. If we define transition from moving from one point to other point, as far as the Afghan political transition is concerned, which means transition from war and violence to peace and justice, at least in Afghanistan, at least in the standard of 1970s in that country. And based on this definition, a political transition can be successful only that can be measured by level of improvement of justice, democratic participation of local people in the political process, and the rise of civil society. Generating this kind of success can be done, in my understanding, only and solely with the long-term commitment of the international community. Why? I would like to take the opportunity to mention a couple of issues that I was involved in Afghanistan. In the last 2 years, I have visited Afghanistan numerous times, and I have had the opportunity to visit over 15 provinces and talk to hundreds of Afghan households, individuals, community leaders, and as well as the people we call them warlords, and leaders of the political parties, as well as the current political authority of Afghanistan. there are two main issues, two main dilemmas that the political transition are facing. First, the weakness of Afghan society. And second, the inability of the government, the central authority, to provide the required services. On the government side, most of the ministries, in my observation, research, and studies, are suffering from severe underfunding. The law and order cannot be enforced because the police are not paid properly. In the justice sector, which I have invested several months and talked to many judges, many prosecutors, those who are organizing it. Most of the judges be not paid on time. Or as Ambassador mentioned, most of Afghan officials, civilian officials, are paid only $40 a month. In comparison to the level of expenses is incomparable. Therefore, the Afghan government requires serious funding and long-term commitment. In the meantime, a structural reform, both on the civilian, military, and legal side. On the side of the society, Afghan society has been weakened because of years of war and especially years of drought. The majority of Afghan people or Afghan households, families, are facing severe destitution, and they are lacking basic resources in the household level. Because of this, they cannot reestablish their social safety network and put their livelihoods together in a level that was close to 70s. These two main factors, especially on the side of Afghan society, has caused many who have access to external resources and many who hold guns to impose their authority on the local communities, both in the urban centers as well as in the rural area. The current political transition in Afghanistan also have some political shortfalls in variety of different levels, especially within the Afghans itself. The current political climate in Afghanistan generally is divided into two camps: the reformists and the conservative or Islamists. On the reformist side, we have President Karzai, who is, after years, the only democratic-minded leader that Afghans have. And then we have a fragmented number of individuals who do not have consensus on the issue, on general issue of, or a strategic issue of political mobilization, especially reconstruction. And also, they do not have a platform that can be understandable by the local Afghan people. On the Islamist or conservative side, the Islamist groups who are founded and organized in the 80s, they kept their access to external resources in variety number of districts and cities and towns around the country. And they are also enjoy the support of well-organized network and well-funded network of activists, both in urban and among the rural populations. You can see they also have the leverage to influence or are influencing or maintaining that influence since 80s and after over many warlords. As a result, there is a political gap in the political transition of Afghanistan that requires to be filled with the pro-democratic forces especially the establishment of civil society. Is Afghan as a nation or Afghanistan as a country is ready for that kind of development? To a certain extent, I do believe yes. And I take this privilege to say yes because I have been trained in the traditional way as well as the modern way in America, as well in Afghanistan. The social structure of Afghanistan traditionally provides a sort of a system that local community had the opportunity to engage in a local level, in the lowest level of a social system in a village, in the rural area, in the mahalla in Afghani language, in the local, within the cities. These local forums called Jirga in the past, and still people mentioning that Jirga as a process, it's a forum that local people get together in a village level, discuss important issues, and make decisions, and then decide over the different issues, either to contact or negotiate with the government or among themselves, or how to use the local resources. This process being infiltrated by the warlords and the Islamist group, especially, in many different areas. You can see in most of Afghanistan a system of shura in the village, district, and provincial, but they are all influenced and dominated one way or the other by these people, those people who have external resources, access to external resources, as well as the holding the gun against the local people. This, in the last 2 years, in my visits from variety different provinces and districts, I have noticed that people are regaining their control over these local forums, and they try to settle issues, arbitrary disputes, solve conflicts, and engage in a political process, but they do not have any resources. They are short in the local level, and they don't have access to external resources. All the resources can't come to their village, came through NGOs. And the local people are not really engaged in the process, how to distribute, how to manage, how to use those resources. Indeed, in these local shuras or local jirgas in the past, the participation of women were not allowed. But we should not forget that Afghanistan is, in my understanding, has a homosocial order where women and men space are distinguished. If we go from that perspective, establishing women councils among the women Afghans is a viable process. It has been done. For instance, in the early 90s, UNDP established a women development program in Badakhshan, northeast Afghanistan. And women activists got together, established the shuras, and managed and got engaged in the process. And these shura were established even in the rural area, while the Islamist group were in power in that part. In this regard, democratization of Afghanistan at the grassroots level with the available resources have some possibilities. In this regard, the donors and international agencies, especially the UN, are obligated to have focused and targeted assistance in order to support these local communities. Afghanistan is not Kabul. Afghanistan is way beyond Kabul. There are so many resources or so many movement, even in the grassroots level, that you may find surprising. For instance, the UN Habitat Program in early 90s established a program in Balkh, in the city of Mazar Sharif, building community centers. And what happened, the local people got together at the end of each week on a Friday. They discussed issues. and the local community had the opportunity to elect their representative into these community centers. Within this network of community centers, a grassroots organization called YCDP, Youth and Children Development, emerged out. The YCDP, I have met them, I hired them for some of my projects in northern Afghanistan. These are all youngsters. I mean, they could have gone to the warlords and the armed groups. Instead, they became civic activists, and they got engaged in the process of rebuilding and reorganizing their social safety networks. And they were able to survive even the Taliban. And you may find in that town probably dozens of women who trained as tailors and other professions who are generating income because of this program. And many youngsters and teenagers as well, young men and women, were attracted into a sports team. They had about 24 soccer teams last year that we visited there. These are examples that work can be done in Afghanistan if we develop a new look, if we reassess our policies, if we think about looking for solution at least in Afghanistan in a way that can be understandable to the Afghan people. As far as the justice system is concerned, justice system or the judiciary in Afghanistan is one of the most underpaid ministry and sector within the structure of the government. Judges are in poor condition. They have no protection. Judges are being beaten in a variety of different areas of the countries by the warlords and armed groups. The executive power of the government are interfering with the decision of the judges left and right, and the warlords are the one who are in charge of any process that is going on in the court system. Because of the lack of resources, Afghanistan is suffering from a severe outbreak of corruption, extortion, bribery, in almost all branches of the government. Indeed, the election that we have discussed in previous sessions is coming. The current situation suggests that the reformist camp in Afghanistan within this political transition are weak. They are not integrated. They don't have any national platform. On the other side, the Islamists, they have the resources, external resources especially. They have the influence over the warlords, and they have the network of activists. Already there are many of those Islamists who control private armies or militia groups are filing for building new political parties and registering them to the Ministry of Justice in Afghanistan, while many democratic circles are not really approved for establishing a party. The Islamists do have a significant influence over the Afghan judiciary. In this case, if there is an election, if we have President Karzai as an elected president for next time, the majority of seats probably may be filled with in the parliament by the supporter of these activists, while it is in contrary to the nature, the social and political and cultural nature of Afghanistan that Professor Barfield has mentioned, and Professor Maley discussed about it. In this regard, the average Afghan population, especially women, are in serious risk in a variety of different levels. And they are not really included in the political process. They are not really participated in the political process in the level it should be. I would like to conclude my discussion to the point that using the the jirga or the local forum or the traditional network and system in Afghanistan as available resources and helping people to engage in the community level would help the average Afghan to participate in the political process and the decision-making process. In addition to that, in the area of justice, Afghanistan has a long tradition of customary law or traditional system of justice. And unfortunately, not really that many people or that many even scholars been pay attention to that. When you get out of the urban centers, the dominant law is customary law in Afghanistan. Of course, there are many elements that are in contrary with the legislated law of Afghanistan and the Constitution and the International Convention of Human Rights, especially women's rights. But this traditional system has area of improvement. And the whole process of the local form of Jirga and Shura and the traditional system in combination with the supporting the central government to get more funds and conduct structural adjustment and legal reform will give us an option of a dual-track approach to Afghanistan. In one side, the government supporting the ability of the government to stand on its feet, to provide services, not the NGOs. And on the other hand, the local Afghans to build their own social safety network and get out of this chronic condition and move toward future. In this regard, the launching a program or supporting the donor support for the establishing programs to build women councils in a national level, I do believe and strongly argue it is a possible way, it is possible, and it will help the Afghan women who are the true victim of all these years of crisis and also the true heroes in contributing massively to the strength of the Afghan household. Thank you.
Okay, we'll entertain questions. Bill?
Yeah. I have a question for both of you. I thought it would be only for Sima.
You want to raise your voice because here comes a microphone.
Okay. My question is this. I'm thinking about a neighboring country, Iran, which many years ago faced lots of the similar, particularly in the customary local and national ideas. Something that was very effective in Iran was legal education for women, because it, on one hand, it prevented total destruction of civil society. Even early in the revolution, it was strengthened. And it's been able in one way or another to protect women's rights. I'm wondering, is legal education available to Afghan women inside Afghanistan? And I think, while I think the women's councils are a great idea, I think if you have a body of Afghan female attorneys, that this is going to be a very valuable asset in the future. And what's the situation now, and what do you look for in the future for both of you?
So you want to go first?
That's a very good question. It's a necessary element of educating the Afghan women about their rights, and I think it's not just legal education. They are requesting that they be educated and informed about their rights in the Islamic context so that they can argue better for their rights. However, there is no plan, and nobody is providing this kind of assistance comprehensively. There are some local efforts on the part of the Women Judges Association and the Judges Association, supported by an international NGO. They are working with themselves by looking at the laws, and they were very active during the process of the Loya Jirga, but much more needs to be done. This is something that the women are requesting constantly, but they have not been listened to.
Within the Afghan government, probably you may find a few women judges. And in most cases within the judiciary, it is more symbolic rather than really genuine to pay attention or recruit women. While there are two women associations, it is one women Afghan judges association and the other is Afghan attorneys, women attorneys association in Kabul. And I do believe that there are possibilities, but unfortunately the resources are not in Afghanistan. This is what I'm suggesting, that because of this lack of resources, the donors' responsibility and the implementing agencies and partners are so great in this area, they have to take a proactive role. Otherwise, it is hard to move things around.
Let me follow up with a question for both of you. Obviously, you're asking for the international community to throw its weight behind efforts to realize these particular rights and opportunities for women. Is there in the international community, however, elements there that are making demands which are inappropriate, which perhaps would not be constructive in terms of what you both know as the Afghan culture? Is there the danger that in bringing forth what are seen as being universal rights, they in effect would not advance the opportunities for women in Afghanistan at this time?
Well, the issue is that most of the, we need to differentiate between NGOs, what we mean by international NGOs and the ones that are run locally by the Afghan women and themselves. The bulk of the resources are committed to the international NGOs, and most of their funds are committed in various sectors. However, not in this sector because it is not their agenda. The whole process of the mandate of women in development is not the mandate of most of these international NGOs. They are either construction related or education related, but they don't have a women in development mandate. However, women's issues and women's programs have become a component of these programs, and it's donated. Most of these organizations, well, some of these organizations partner with the Afghan indigenous civil society institutions. So therefore, it is the process is not, and the demand is not coming from the Afghan women themselves. There is a huge gap in what the Afghan women need and want versus what is being imposed on them by the international community in many circumstances. For example, the area that they need capacity building, they need to build their own individual organizations so that when the international community leaves, that they would be able to continue these services and continue to provide the services in their communities is lacking. Many of these NGOs, the international NGOs, partner with the local NGOs only for specific projects. The long-term stability and the sustainability issues are seriously lacking.
The problem that I have seen is that a gap in perception on the women issue or gender relation from a Western-oriented perspective and what is out there. This is nothing really right or wrong here, but Afghanistan is a segmented society socially, and the only phrase that I can apply is it is a homosocial order. Means women do have their own space and men have their own space, and each one restricted each other. It is right, I don't know. It is wrong, I don't know either. But this is the way it is, what is there in Afghanistan. If we go there and impose a system that try to mix and violate or integrate these two spaces, it is a very hard and difficult problem.
One of the questions that I have concerns the legitimacy of aid and sponsorship and guidance that come from outside. and the effect that that might have on the survivability of programs that have been jump-started with international aid. It seems to me there's a real dilemma. We have very nationalistic, you might call, or perhaps localistic people who prefer to have indigenous solutions, and yet, as you've both stated, there's a lack of resources internally for the kinds of programs that we all would like to see in Afghanistan, which means there will be foreign fingerprints, and there will be some requirement for accountability, which is, of course, why things tend to go through established NGOs rather than to the people, as Ms. Wali proposed they go. What are some solutions to this? How do we avoid delegitimizing programs because they have foreign affiliations and origins?
One solution that I can propose that comes from the Afghan people themselves, in particular the women, they feel that they have a place in providing these similar services, yet they don't have the resources and they don't have the capacity. They need to be able, they would like to. They welcome the international aid and they welcome the presence of the international community. However, they contend that they're left out of the process, that they need to be very much a part of the process and working in partnership. And this is why we need to make sure that the international NGOs and the foreign donors listen to the voices of the Afghan women themselves, in particular, what their needs are, and also to the solutions that they propose, because their solutions would be sustainable solutions that would be dealing with the root causes of the problems rather than dealing with the symptoms of the issues. For example, throughout the Taliban reign, and this was a good intention, well, on the part of the women's organizations in the U.S. to help save Afghan women and Afghan women from the Taliban. However, there was much emphasis on the dress code and on the burqa, which is the head-to-toe garment that is worn by women. However, women were saying this is not a priority issue. Our priority issue is poverty and insecurity. And it's these issues that need to be addressed, and we need to work together to educate the international community and the women's organizations that want to work with us to really to take the issues that we have into consideration rather than imposing what they think are real problems on the ground. So it's a question of partnership and working together and heeding each other's voices that is really important.
Back there, please. Yes, please. Okay,
yes.
first you.
Okay. I was just going to ask Ms. Sima Wali that you mentioned, I understood you saying that there's a problem of funding in Afghanistan, but there's also a problem of expertise. Although there are some areas in which the expertise of individual Afghans are underutilized. But did I hear you right that you say that in education, for example, the teachers are not trained and the schools are only open 2 or 3 hours and the textbooks have issues. I was wondering if you could please explain a little bit more about, problems of education in Afghanistan and in what way international community is being helpful. Thanks.
The international community certainly is being very helpful, and as I stated earlier, Afghans welcome the pledges and the presence of the international community and working with them in partnership. What I meant by the statement is that there seems to be much pressure here in the U.S. and internationally to report that success has been delivered in Afghanistan. For example, the quantity versus the quality issue, the quantity of this, for example, 1 million children have been registered in school, and 2,000 schools have been built in Afghanistan, begs the point that what is the quality of those services? Afghans on the ground contend that they don't, you heard several speakers before me state that a school is just a tent, and how can you actually run a school under a tent? And also in the provinces, especially when the security prohibits, where there is the kind of Taliban mentality against women's education still exists, and girls' education. I mean, these are the issues that we need to address, and we have to take a community-based approach to addressing these problems. For example, there has to be much more attention and resources to training educators, Afghan teachers, making sure that there are enough textbooks. I mean, these are the issues. The quality of education is just as important rather than the quantity, which sometimes, unfortunately, seems to be politically driven, driven by political agendas.
It's back there.
Yes, I want to ask you something, Neamat John, about what you mentioned, the political parties and the inability of democratic forces to organize themselves around political parties to contest the election, and particularly the democratic wing of the Mr. Karzai's government. And do you predict that the political scene will be dominated by fundamentalists if there was election tomorrow? What you described, it's very similar to the situation in 1960s when political parties first emerged in Afghanistan. The political scene was dominated by the communist, leftist party, and the Islamist parties. Hizb Islami, many fractions still exist. And people, at least those who were politically active, did not trust the government at that time. And despite the repeated attempt by the government and establishment, and despite the resources they had, they were not able to establish a single party to support their aims. And as a result, it obvious coup d'etats, one after another, because of the political situation. Do you see any similar scenario emerging in Afghanistan if that continues as such?
There are a number of differences. It is the two different circumstances. But there is one similarity there which I raised that. The problem with Afghanistan in the past and now, the local resources, the political process cannot rely on the local resources. Therefore, they have to, or they had to in the past, attract resources from abroad. Once the resources came from abroad through specific channels and to specific organizations, of course, they were not really a part of the local, the dynamic process within Afghan society. They were more on the ideological part of that, the sources that provided resources. We have a number of different Afghan leftists, for instance, communist groups, or the Islamists. Nowadays, we have the Wahhabis or the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood or the Maududi type of Islamists in Afghanistan. They do not generate their resources in Afghanistan now. Of course, they do through these criminal economy of opium and narcotics. And the problem that we have here is the local community are weak in managing the available resources. And for that reason, they need support to move and mobilize whatever they have toward rebuilding and reestablishing their process. In the state level, the political elite, there are shortages of perception of understanding local issues, both on the donor sides, international community, as well as the Afghan authority. All the power in the management or the blueprint power of Afghanistan is allocated in Kabul, in the capital of Kabul. Many of the NGOs are more active in that area rather than in other parts of the country. Of course, the effort and the contribution of NGOs in Afghanistan has been very gracious and wonderful. They have really supported Afghans, and Afghanistan is a very tough place to work on a variety of different aspects. Back to what you have mentioned, because of such a gap in the political leadership within the political transition, those who have access to power, those who have access to external resources dominate the process. If there is an election, of course, for instance, in Mazar-e-Sharif, in northern Afghanistan, who has the nerve to go against the warlords? The same thing in Herat, the same thing in eastern Afghanistan, which I spent 2 months this past year. This is the sad dilemma, unfortunately. And in the elite level of the government, the President Karzai's cabinet is divided into variety number of factions. Especially there are radical elements. They try to use or utilize ethnic issues, which is not really a big thing, a big dilemma within the Afghan ethnic groups, in my experiences and understanding, in order to improve or influence politics. Pro Pashtuns, pro, I don't know, Tajik, pro Hazaras. And President Karzai has been caught between stone and rock. And he is going back. This is the similarity. He's going back to the old palace politics. Try to balance this political spectrum. But unfortunately, is this going to generate a platform that recruit the democratic-minded forces, at least in the urban centers? I doubt it. And for that reason, I do believe that going back to grassroots, the structure is there within the Afghan society. It is another a more viable solution.
Since we're going back, let me correct history here. There were 2 elections that were held, 1965 and 1969, and in both of them, political parties were not legalized, so that there were no party labels. In effect, there were clandestine parties of the extremes, particularly the PDPA, the communist factions, as well as some of the religious parties. But in the end, there were 216 representatives. Each one, practically, was his own party. So that the parliament itself was totally unruly. It was anarchy. And so it had there was no cooperation here with the executive branch. It strikes me that if we don't see the kinds of integrative parties emerge here, we would hope they would not be built around the wrong kind of ideology. But if they don't emerge, then what it was every local influential was able to elect his own a wakil or representative. Today what it will be is the local regional commanders who will have perhaps several legislators who are beholden to them. I don't think it'll be much better. So I raise this because the king had legislation on his desk for legitimizing political parties, and there were some moderate political parties that were ready to go at the time. They were prevented to doing so because the palace bought into the idea that political parties were divisive institutions. And so it was never legalized, and ultimately the parliamentary system failed. And I should say the government fell. Please.
Majid Khan from the University of Maryland. I'm asking a question about these warlords because, they are the main responsible for all problems existing in Afghanistan and for the whole problem existing in Afghanistan right now as well. So what's the possible way to stop them to come out, or to kick them out from the existing political process, like as well, the Parjam and Khalaq, they are not able to register their parties. But now the warlords, they are going to be in the next, parliament. They will be the powerful. So what's the possible way to stop them not to go into the political system? Thank you.
Okay. This is a genuine question that unfortunately what you have mentioned in a country that has gone through that long political crisis, everybody has a red mark as a Khalq, as a Percham, as a, I don't know, variety of different groups. And now this became a sort of taboo or a red tape on certain political activists and who are committing and confessing for democratic principles in Afghanistan standards. And unfortunately, the process, the discrepancy is this, that there are groups who want to register, for instance, to establish a political party. You have to have, you have to collect about 600 signatures, 600 to 700 signatures in order to be qualified to register. And there are groups who collected signatures, but they were banned because of their past, or there are people who are within, or that some of their members. On the other side, we have Islamist group who control militias, who have external access to external resources, who have been involved in all this infighting or proxy war in Afghanistan. And now they are building new parties with new names, and they are registering. See, this is on the political side. On the area of warlords, the only way, it is not really military force only. You have to go back to the Afghan people. We have to learn from history. The Afghan Islamist groups had received the largest share of the international assistance during the 80s. I was an activist in Afghanistan. I was a part of the resistance. And those who were established in Pakistan or in Iran, they have lost legitimacy among the resistance. For that reason, they couldn't really put a practical, pragmatic government, because what they were talking, it was a political ideology, was in contrary with the local understanding of people about culture, Islam, and so forth, so on. The only way to go is to make a combination. Donors, UN and implementing agencies, they have to give a priority to support civil society, to support Afghan communities in the local level, in the village level, in the mahalla or urban city district level. And they have to disperse the accumulated power that's been collected and kept in Kabul outside in the provinces. There are 32, 33 more provinces in the country. And for the record, I was involved in a study actually sponsored for the USAID on human security in Afghanistan. And hopefully this report comes out soon, and the USAID hopefully release that to the public. And these are a number of issues that discuss in very details.
Yes, back there. Why don't you go ahead anyway?
I will. My name is Shakila Khalji from Ready for Europe, Ms. Wali, and thanks for having you here. I think you probably were here when Mr. Ambassador mentioned about the security issue, postponing of the election, and basically the fact that there is a delay on that is not necessarily due to the security issue, rather it's a logistical problem. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think it's both. It really is a serious problem logistically, but at the same time it's also a security problem in terms of women organizing and getting information out to women constituents has been a very faulty process, and in order for women to congregate and to be made aware of the processes, security has been a major issue, because the indigenous NGOs that want to go into the provinces and get the women organizers is a major security problem. For example, one of the issues that we are talking about, the building of the women's resource centers, which is part of the Ministry of Women's Affairs. Even the buildings have not been built in other than 3 or 4, is because of security considerations. And again, when you build the building and not have programs for women in these centers, I think it's fairly futile to just have a building called the Women's Resource Center without actual programs and women who are equipped and trained to work with other women on the ground, and getting the information out, such as the electoral process, should be a priority because we don't have that much time. And again, women are saying a priority issue is security.
There's another hand there, yes.
Thank you. My question goes to Mr. Nojumi. It's specifically regarding the Judicial Reform Commission, and I want to know if you have any experiences of the commission itself. It was set up to act as a coordinating body to carry out judicial reform. It tends to be one of the slowest things that ever tends to come out of reconstruction efforts. What would you recommend happens from the international community's effort and also the Afghan government's effort to improve the job of the Judicial Reform Commission? Should it be completely removed, or should it be given more teeth to actually be productive in what it's supposed to be doing?
I think to have the Judicial Reform Commission in Afghanistan is a good thing to have. And it is a body that deals with the reform and sees the legal or the judiciary from a reformist perspective. Indeed, the overall judiciary in Afghanistan is underfunded heavily. This is due to the probably the National Development Framework that been established at the beginning of the new government in Afghanistan. There are within that framework, there have been paid more attention in the private sector and not really too much to the public sector. And since the judiciary went under the domination of the conservative and some Islamist leadership, and it became a taboo against the whole judiciary sector, and the judiciary didn't really give or haven't given the appropriate funding. In that regard, this is one part. On the other side, the hundreds of those local clergies who do not really any training in legal studies or legal training being recruited and put into this system in order to balance the political power against whoever is the reformist in the government. In order to have I do believe that having the Judicial Reform Commission in Afghanistan is a great thing, but there should be measures by the donors to monitor the level of accomplishment and also generate responsibilities in aspected levels. In this regard, to my knowledge, judiciary in Afghanistan is not really going to be the problem of, or the crisis of justice, that what I have written in my writing. The crisis of justice in Afghanistan cannot be solved only to support one sector of the government, but the judiciary, the sector requires new leadership. There is no way that they can inform judicial reform by the Reform Commission and under these current circumstances. In this regard, this has to be seen as a part, as a general structure reform of the government. In that case, having a judicial reform is an excellent thing.
Well, the hour is late. I don't see any additional hands. Those who've remained have shown this dedication to learn everything is possible about gender and democracy and human rights. And I want you to join me in thanking our speakers this afternoon and all of our speakers today. I think this has been a very, very informative, useful session. Thank you. And Bob Hathaway has the last, if you will, Bob Hathaway has the last word here.
Again, I just also wish to add my thanks to all of you, to our speakers. I think this has been a very rich afternoon. It's easy, frankly, to get discouraged about Afghanistan, but I think we've been reminded that there's also reasons to be hopeful. Thanks to Marvin, to Dennis, to particularly our speakers. We look forward to having you back here again soon. We are adjourned.
Thank you.